Alright, in our first lesson, we're going to answer two essential questions. First, how do I find the perimeter and area of rectangles and squares? And second, how do I find missing sides of rectangles and squares? If you look at your workbook, page 43, it says, look at the rectangles below. What does perimeter mean? What does area mean? Well, if you look at the very first rectangle, you can see that they've already given you the perimeter. The perimeter is 16 centimeters. That's because perimeter is the distance around an object. In this case, our object is the rectangle, and the distance around it can be measured with centimeters. In this case, we have 6 centimeters at the top, so it's 6 centimeters long. It's 6 centimeters long on the bottom. It's 2 centimeters long on the right side and 2 centimeters long on the left side. So if you add up all of those outer edges, you can figure out the total length all the way around is 16 centimeters. And they show you the centimeters with these tick marks. If you look on the top, yeah, you can see that there's 5 tick marks, but they're breaking it up into 6 centimeters. So from here to the edge is 1 centimeter long. Here's your 2nd centimeter, here's your 3rd centimeter, your 4th, your 5th, and finally your 6th centimeter. So those tick marks don't tell you how many centimeters. Those tick marks show you how it's breaking up the rectangle into centimeter sections. In this case, 6 of them. And of course on the right side we can see 2 centimeters long on the right side and for the left. Now on the other rectangle, same rectangle actually, you have an area of 12 square centimeters or 12 centimeters squared. This one you can see is broken up into squares. That's because area is the amount of surface an object covers. So with this rectangle, we're talking about, how much surface is this? How much are we covering? We're talking about the inside now. We're not necessarily talking about the outside. And we measure area with squares. And you can see that this rectangle has been broken up into 12 squares that happen to be centimeter squares. That's because every square here is 1 centimeter long and 1 centimeter wide. So that is a centimeter square. It's a square with units of centimeters. Notice how we write centimeters squared. A lot of times you will see that little 2, that little exponent of 2, or sometimes you'll see it written this way, square centimeters. SQ stands for square. Now remember, area is always measured with square units. The square units don't have to be square centimeters. They could be any square of any size. A square unit is just that. It's a square that has length and width all of 1 unit. So in this case we have a inch square. That means it's a square, every side is 1 inch long. If you look at the floor in the classroom, you'll see feet squares. That means every square in the classroom has a length and a width that are 1 foot long. So we could figure out the area of the floor in our classroom just by counting up how many square feet tiles we can find. Square units can be as small as millimeter squares. They could be as big as mile squares. Imagine that. So back to workbook page 43. If you look at the bottom, we're going to fill in part of that table. They give you the length and the width of a rectangle that they want you to, attempt to draw. You can draw it on, centimeter graph paper. You can draw it on a whiteboard. It doesn't matter to me. But they want you to draw rectangles with specific lengths and widths and then use that to determine the perimeter and the area. So the first one we're going to do is number 2 because number 1's technically already been done for us. We want a length of 4 and a width of 3. So I might do that down here. Here's my length of 4, here's my width of 3, and it would look like that. 4 here, and 3 on the sides. If I want to find the perimeter of it, it might help me to do the tick marks. Don't feel like you need to do these are optional. But you can see that there's 4 centimeters at the top, broken up by 3 tick marks, 4 centimeters on the bottom, 3 on the right, 3 on the left. So if I want to find the distance around this object, I'm going to need to add up all of those sides. I would have to do 4 plus 3 plus 4 plus 3. And that is going to give me a perimeter of 14 centimeters. So all the way around this rectangle is 14 centimeters long. Area, on the other hand, well, that's where I count up how many squares can fill in the object. If you count up the squares, you will see that there's actually 12 squares here. Or you may want to just multiply. You can do your length times your width, and that's where you can get an area of 12 square centimeters. Don't forget to put that in your label. We're not talking about centimeters anymore. We're talking about square centimeters. So I'm going to put that little 2. Let's see. My next rectangle has to be 8 centimeters long and 1 centimeter wide, which means it's going to look something like this. It's going to be a skinny rectangle. And if I want to, let's see, this is 8 obviously, and this is 8 here. You can see the little tick marks breaking it up into 8 sections. And then of course it's 1 centimeter long on each side. If I want to find the perimeter, I'm going to have to add up all those sides. The total length all the way around, 8 plus 1 plus 8 plus 1, is going to give me a perimeter of 18 centimeters. Area, well, I mean, you can kind of see it's pretty obvious that it's only made up of 8 square centimeters. Or you can multiply your length times your width. 8 times 1 is going to give you 8 square centimeters. Now we're going to skip down to number 6. Number 6 is just giving you L and W for length and width. That's because they don't want you to show how you would solve or find the perimeter or area of a specific rectangle. This is going to be for any rectangle that you come across. You're going to write a formula that you can use for any rectangle. So for, let's see, any rectangle, so I'm going to change the color to orange. To find the perimeter of any rectangle, I would have to do length plus width plus length plus width. Or maybe what I want to do is 2 times the length plus 2 times the width, because you notice that you have to use the length in there twice and the width in there twice, so why don't you just multiply them by 2 before adding them up? That's an option. Don't feel like you have to do it. Area, well, that's pretty simple. It's length times width, L times W. If you look at your formula sheet, you can see the area of a rectangle is right here. Area equals length times width. That's where you will find the formula for area of a rectangle. And feel free to write in the formula for the perimeter if you'd like. Now, workbook page 44, the figure at the right is a square. The length of one side of the square is given. Explain why you know the lengths of the other 3 sides of the square. Well, if this side is 76 centimeters, isn't this side also 76 centimeters? And probably the top and the bottom, of course? That's because we're talking about a square here, right? All sides of a square are the same length. So now that we know all the sides are 76, let's talk about perimeter. Perimeter, you know, is the measure of the distance around a figure, the length all the way around the figure. So in the space at the right, show how addition can be used to find the perimeter of the square. Well, just like with rectangles, you can just add up all your sides. So I would have to do 76 plus 76 plus 76 plus 76. Or, for number 9, could you do this with multiplication? If you don't want to add up 76 4 different times, well, why don't you just times 4 times 76? No matter which way you go about this, you're going to get a perimeter of, let's see, if I add them all up, 304 centimeters. Continuing on to work on workbook page 44, looking at 10. To calculate the area of a rectangle, we find the product of the measures of two of its adjacent sides. Basically what they're just saying there is that we had to do length times width to find the area of a rectangle. Why can this formula also be used to find the area of a square? Well, if you didn't already know this, a square is actually a special kind of rectangle. That's right. Think about what a rectangle is. A rectangle, you know, is going to have two opposite sides that are parallel, that have the same length. It's going to have right angles. Think about it. This side and this side are opposite each other. They're parallel and they're also the same length. This side and this side are opposite each other. They're parallel, they're the same length. And just like a rectangle, this square has angles that are 90 degrees. So you could still use that same formula to find the area of the square. You could do length times width. Meaning, well, since every side is 76, your length is 76, and your width is 76, you could do 76 times 76, which would give you an area of 5,776 square centimeters. Now, another way to write this, instead of using L times W, or length times width, would be to say side times side. That's because, you know, in a square, your length and your width are pretty much the same. It doesn't really matter. You could say this one's the length, you could say this one's the length, that doesn't matter, because they're all the same. So instead, you could just say side times side. Or you may write it this way, which you know, we say that is side squared, or side times side. Look back at your formula sheet. There's your formula for finding the area of a square. You can see it says area equals side squared. But again, feel free to write on there side times side if you would like, just to remind yourself of what that means. Now, these two problems aren't in your workbook, but we can still solve them. I'm actually going to change this a little bit. We are going to find the missing sides of rectangles and squares when we are given the area. Take a look at the first one. We have a rectangle that has an area of 30 square centimeters, and it looks like we have a width of 3 centimeters, and we're trying to figure out the length. Well, think back to the formula. You know the formula for finding the area of a rectangle is area equals length times width. Well, we already have our area. Our area is 30. Looks like we're missing the length, and we have the width, which is 3. So think to yourself, 3 times what number would give you 30? Or maybe you want to work backwards. Maybe you would rather divide, because you could solve this equation by thinking, okay, well, what's 30 divided by 3? 30 divided by 3 would give me 10. And that makes sense because 10 times 3 is 30. So you could find the missing side of a rectangle if you're given the area by using division. Now, square is a little bit different. Here we have an area of 16 square centimeters. And you know the formula, area equals side times side. Well, our area is 16, but we don't have any of the sides. At least with a rectangle, we had one of the sides. But with a square, we don't know any of them, right? If we knew one, we would know all of them. So we'd have to think to ourselves, what would we do here? A lot of people want to try and use division, but that would be incorrect. Here you have to think, what number times itself, or what number squared is going to give you 16? Let's see, 2 times 2, that's 4. 3 times 3, that's 9. 4 times 4, well, there's your 16. 4 is the missing side because 4 times itself, right? 4 times 4 is going to give you 16. don't forget that every side in a square needs to be exactly the same. So this is 4, this is 4, this is 4, this is 4, and that's why that works out, because 4 times 4 will give you that area of 16. Alright, finally our takeaways. We have the definitions for perimeter and area. And don't forget, a square unit is a unit of area equal to the area of a square with 1 unit sides. And then I have some formulas here to find the perimeter of any figure. You can add up all the sides, but there's also a couple other options. So if you wanted to find the perimeter of a rectangle and you didn't want to add up all the sides, you could do it this way. Remember the 2 times the length plus 2 times the width. Or maybe for the square, if you don't want to add up all the sides, you could do 4 times the side, or 4s. For area of rectangles and squares, you could do length times width, obviously. Side times side for a square. It's same idea as length times width. And to find the missing side of a rectangle, divide the area by the given length or width. That's the one where you can use division. Now, squares, remember, are different. To find the missing sides of a square, determine what number squared will give you the area. So what number times itself is going to give you that area?